Let's go a little bit further in the opinion of Rav. So we discussed, one of the things that we discussed was Rav's opinion about actually, before we get back to Rav, one of the things we discussed was that we're on 16a4, 16a4, towards the bottom of the page, the second column on 16a4. So the Gemara, based on a pasuk, told us that mayim solution, the water that's detached, in other words, water that I take with a bucket out of a well, and I pour it on something, that is able to be machshir, it's able to cause something to be susceptible to tumah. Right? In other words, for something to be able to become tameh, it first has to have water fall on it. Water has to first get on it. So the Gemara suggested that based on a pasuk, there are two different types of waters: water that is attached to the ground and water that is detached from the ground. Both of those have the ability to be machshir items. In other words, to make things susceptible. Ask the Gemara, is that so? Is it so that detached water can generate susceptibility to tumah? Biblically, V'amar Rav Yossi bar Chanina, mashkim beis matbachia. Right, we saw this statement above that Rav Yossi the son of Chanina said that the beverages of the butchering place, lo dayan shein dacha, not only are they pure, el she'et machshir, and they do not generate susceptibility. Now, one of the liquids, there's two liquids in the butchering place. One is the blood, and the other is water. And what do we see? He says that it does not generate susceptibility. So, and that is mayim solution, that is separated water, right? And this brisa is telling us explicitly, Rabbi Yossi is telling us explicitly, that the beverages in this place are not able to make things susceptible to tumah. And you just told me that water that is detached is able to generate susceptibility. So the Gemara says, Tergama al dam. So what we have to understand that Rav Yossi, the son of Chanina, is actually referring to the blood of the butchering place. That is not able to make things susceptible to tumah, okay? Items susceptible to tumah, but water can. Okay, and where is this idea of blood being an exception? We're going to see it's not just any blood, because we know blood is actually one of the liquids that does make things susceptible to tumah. We're specifically talking about blood of kadshim, blood of sacrificial meats. There's going to be a unique exception saying that blood of sacrificial meats does not make something mukhshar, again, susceptible to tumah. Right, again, just want to review. We're talking about a couple of things over here. There is making something tameh. There is making something tameh that's able to then go ahead, the item is tameh, and it's able to make something else tameh. But there is something preceding all of that, which is that for anything to be able to receive tumah, it first has to be susceptible to tumah. How do you become susceptible to tumah? You have to have a liquid on it. A liquid has to go on it, right? And so yesterday, again, we distinguished between separate water from the grounds and water separated from the grounds. And the Gemara now is questioning, wait, you see that water separating from the ground is not able to become, does not make something susceptible to tumah, because that was his statement, that these liquids do not make, that the liquids of the butchering place do not make things susceptible to tumah. So the Gemara says, no, we're not referring to water in that statement. We're referring to the main liquid in the butchering place. The main liquid in the butchering place is blood, and blood specifically of kadshim, sacrificial blood, and we'll see why. To Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Amar Rav Yochanan, minayin ledam kadshim she'eno machshir. Where do we see that blood of sacred offerings does not generate susceptibility to tumah? Shenemar al arz tishbechenu kamayim. The pasuk says in reference to blood of an animal, there is a mitzvah that you should spill it upon the ground like water. Okay, so generally speaking, we with blood that of an animal that gets slaughtered, we have a mitzvah of letting it spill on the ground, and then actually we have a mitzvah that follows that, which is we cover the blood. Kisui hadam. There's actually so in a slaughterhouse, that's basically one of the things that happens is they let the blood fall out and then they cover the blood. And so the pasuk says that you should spill it on the ground like water. What is that? What do we learn from there? Dam shem nishbach kamayim machshir. That blood which is allowed to be spilled on the ground like water, that is like water. That just like water generates susceptibility to tumah, so too such a blood which is spilled on the ground like water is able to generate susceptibility. 16b1. Dam she'eno nishbach kamayim eno machshir. But blood that is not spilled on the ground like water does not generate susceptibility. So what does it do with blood of kadshim? Because blood of a sacrifice, you are not allowed to let it fall to the ground. What they do is after they slaughter the animal, they catch the blood, because the blood is then going to be used to be sprinkled onto the mizbeach. Right? So the blood is not allowed to be sprinkled. So you see from this pasuk that dam kadshim, blood of a sacrificial, sacrifices are not going to generate things, make things susceptible to tumah, and that's what Rav Yossi, the son of Rav Chanina, said. Okay, maskif la Rav Shmuel bar Ami, haridama tamtis, but there's something called the blood that trickles out an offering before and after the jet of lifeblood. Okay, denishbach mayim, which is allowed to be spilled on the ground like water. What that means is as follows: when you first start the slaughtering, there's an initial squirt. Okay, sorry for getting a little graphic over here. And what that means is that if you ever watch these like videos of slaughtering, if you want to, basically like there's basically like a little bit that comes out and then it goes. Okay, so basically the little bit that comes out in the beginning and then the little bit that trickles out at the end, that is called dama tamsis. Okay, and that's not sprinkled on the mizbeach. That is not included in the blood that is sprinkled on the mizbeach, and that water is allowed to fall to the ground because that is not blood that's going to be used for a holy purpose. Okay, so but yet, so it is spilled on the ground like water, and yet ve'eno machshir, and yet we just saw from that statement that all that blood in the slaughterhouse, in the butcher house, is not going to make something susceptible to tuma, right? So what you see, so you tried telling me, because since it's kachim, therefore it's unique. No, but this blood also is not used for kachim. It is spilled on the ground, and yet it's not something which makes something susceptible to tuma. So I'm Rav Zera hanach l'dama tamtis. Don't ask me a question from the blood that trickles out. Because such blood, even when it comes to chulin, is not able to generate chulin, meaning non-kachim items, is not able to make something susceptible to tuma. In other words, this is not, don't make that inference from, the statements above, because at the end of the day, that blood, dam tamtis, the trickling blood, that is something which doesn't generate tuma in general, right? In other words, to review, generally blood, you and I, when we have blood, whether it's human blood, animal blood, if that falls on some food, then that food is now going to be susceptible to tuma, okay? However, when it comes to kachim, we said, kachim blood is not, okay? And then there's dama tamtis, there's the blood that trickles, whether it's carbon blood, whether it's just animal blood from a regular, whatever, butcher shop, from the regular slaughterhouse, that blood, the dama tamsis, is never able to make anything susceptible to tuma, and we're going to see the source for that now. Okay, come Rav Shmuel bar Rav Ami. Rav Shmuel bar Ami received explanation from Rav Zera. Da Amar Rachman, the pasuk said, "Rak chazak l'bilti achal adam ki adam hu nefesh." Okay, so one of the many prohibitions which talks about not eating blood, it says, "Don't eat blood, for the blood is the life." Dam sha nefesh yotzabo karo dam. The blood which life leaves the animal is considered blood. Dam sha nefesh yotzabo ina karo dam. Blood which life does not leave the animal is not considered blood. So the initial trickle out, that's just the blood of a wound, right? The initial blood that comes out when you slaughter, that's the blood of a wound. The blood all the way at the end, the animal's already dead. It's only the blood in the middle that's actually considered blood. But across the board, again, so in other words, if a person is in a slaughterhouse and the animal is slaughtered and then a little bit of trickling of that trickle blood falls on some seeds, on some food, whatever it is, that food is not going to be susceptible to tuma based on this pasuk. So it's not a unique idea of kachim, it's going to be true across the board. Okay? Yeah, fine. Now the Gemara goes back to Rav. Rav was again of the opinion who said that. Fine. We go back to Rav. Rav was in the opinion that beverages are not susceptible to tuma at all under even biblical law. Right. In other words, Shmuel said that beverages are able to become tameh, but they're not able to be mitame biblically. And Rav said they're not even able to become tameh midoraisa. That again, liquids, according to, now we're no longer talking about making something else susceptible to tumah. We're talking about it itself becoming tameh. And we had machlokas Rav and Shmuel, right? Rav said liquids, water, blood, wine, they can become tameh midoraisa biblically. For them to make something else tameh, that is only rabbinic. And according to Rav, he said biblically they're not even able to become tameh. And certainly not able to make other things tameh. Only rabbinically are they able to become tameh and be tameh other things. Okay, fine. Tashma, we try to bring a proof against Rav. Dam shenitma v'izrako. Let's say blood of an offering became tameh. So again, the person slaughters an animal and for a karban, and then the blood becomes tameh. It comes into contact with a person who is tameh. B'shogeg kortza. If the person then goes ahead and what you do out in the Beis Hamikdash is they catch the blood and then they sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach. That is the final step. One of the steps, I should say, of the offering, and that brings about the offering to be complete is when the blood is sprinkled. So if it became tameh and then the person sprinkled it and b'shogeg, but it all happened by mistake, hortza, then the carbon is still accepted. B'mezid, if it was done deliberately, lo hortza, it's not going to be accepted. Okay, so what do we see? We see that the blood is able to be tameh. If you, right, we're talking about dam shnit mozrako. You see, the blood is clearly able to become tameh, and the assumption of the Gemara is that it's happening midoraisa. So the Gemara says no, midorabanan. Really, all beverages are acceptable to only rabbinically. Udelo ki Yosef ben Yoezer is treza, and Yosef ben Yoezer, who said, remember earlier said that the blood is not going to become tameh at all, even midorabanan, while you're in the Beis Hamikdash area. This Tana holds that it will be able to become tameh at least rabbinically in the Beis Hamikdash area, and that's why he makes this distinction between shogeg, mezid. But basically what comes out of it here is that the Gemara assumed that when we said the blood is tameh, we're referring to it being a tameh midoraisa. The Gemara says no, it's tameh midorabanan. Yosef ben Yoezer said that in the Beis Hamikdash, remember in the Beis Hamikdash he said there is no tumah of the liquids whatsoever. Okay, but the Tana of this brisa says that no, it will become tameh at least midorabanan, and therefore if it's done midoraisa, it will not be accepted. Okay.
I find this to be very interesting because
I'm glad to hear that.
The fact are you going to find out? Say it.
I've said I'm glad to hear that.
Only after the fact are you even going to be aware? Because if you know that it's tameh beforehand,
right?
Then you can't.
Right.
So
right.
This is all.
Unless the person knew and did this whole thing deliberately, he's just a bad person.
But the Kohen's not going to do that.
Yeah, the Kohanim were not that great always. The Kohanim, no, there was some really bad Kohanim back in the day.
They would die every year. So.
The Kohen, yeah. But there are some bad characters in the of the Kohanim. But yeah, could be. But you're right. It's either the person knew ahead of time and it's a bad character, or it's someone who we only found out afterwards. 100%. Tashma amat tzitz maratze. Okay, so the Torah tells us that the tzitz is a thing the Kohen wears over his forehead. It atones. It causes atonement, and it's not clear what it causes atonement for. So the Gemara is going to try to clarify. If it's for the blood, the meat, or chelev, which chelev is parts which are put on the mizbeach, they become tameh. Bein b'shogig, bein b'mezid, whether it's done by mistake or whether it's done on purpose. Bein b'amnes, bein b'ratzon, bein b'yachim, bein b'tzibur, whether it's done on purpose, whether because the person had to, or whether the person did it willingly, whether it's done by an individual or by a congregation. Fine. So what happened? What do we say over here? We're saying that the blood, that basically the Gemara says that the tzitz affects like atonement for all these things which were done, whether by mistake, on purpose. And one of the things that's mentioned is blood that becomes tameh. So what do you see? You see that blood actually becomes tameh. And the tzitz, right? If the tzitz is going to affect it, then obviously the blood becomes. So what do we see over here? We see that tzitz is. I'm sorry. What do we see over here? We see that blood is able to become tameh, which is not like Rav. Rav said that liquids do not become tameh. So Gemara says again, midrabanan udelo ki Yosef ben Yoezer is treda. No, we're saying the beverages are acceptable to tumah, but it's only rabbinic. And again, not like Yosef ben Yoezer. Yosef ben Yoezer said that in the Beis Hamikdash area, liquids do not become tameh even midrabanan. This brisa held, the author of this brisa holds that liquids do become tameh midrabanan, and the tzitz is able to affect atonement for them. Tashma, we try to bring another proof. V'nasa Aaron esavona hakachim. Again, the pasuk in regards to the tzitz says that Aaron shall bear a sin of the offerings. Okay, now here, interestingly, as opposed to the brisa before, it just spoke more broadly. Over here, it quotes a pasuk. It quotes a pasuk. So it's telling us, if it quotes a pasuk, that obviously what we're referring to, rabbinic or biblical? Biblical, right? So the answers we given until now, not going to be so simple to say. So the Gemara says, V'chi eza avan hu noseh, and the Gemara says, which sin is he able to atone for? Imavon pigol. If you want to say it's the sin of pigol, again, pigol is when a person has intention to eat his karban after it was, after its allotted time. Lo yiratz. The pasuk already says that it will not be forgiven. Imavon nosar. If you want to say it's about the sin of nosar, nosar is when a person leaves it over beyond its allotted time. Lo yichashev. The pasuk says it should not be considered, which means it will not have atonement. Ha'inanosa elavon tuma. It is rather, what is it? It's that the tzitz brings about forgiveness for the sin of tumah. Shehutra miklala b'tzibor, which the reason that tumah is unique is because that the tzitz is able to bring atonement for it is because tumah already has another leniency, and that is that when the entire congregation is tameh, then you're allowed to bring karbano. You're allowed to do the avoda, right? This is a discussion about the Beis Hamikdash, about Chanukah, right? There's a whole big question about it. I think we discussed this once briefly, and that's when the question is why they even bothered going ahead and finding only the tahar candles, and they couldn't bring tameh oil when the entire congregation or most of the congregation is tameh. You're actually allowed to go ahead and do the service, do the avoda in a state of tumah. The point is that what comes out of this brisa is that he's saying that the tzitz midoraisa from this pasuk is able to bring about atonement for tuma. So ask the Gemara, my love tumas dam. We're not referring to the tuma of the blood of an offering, which again does not go like Rav. Amar Papa lo tumas kematzim. No, there's other tuma. There's other things become tame, and that is the tuma of kematzim. Kamitza is what the mincha offering is basically brought. A kamitza is basically the Kohen would put his hand into the flour and then basically hold on to this. This is called a kamitza, and that is what we're referring to. Okay, so we have not been able to bring a proof against Rav. Final attempt to bring a disproof against Rav. Tashma, we have a source. This is a fascinating dialogue we're going to invoke over here. Chagai was one of the prophets, not such a well-known prophet, but he was one of the prophets, and he lived during the time when the Kohanim are coming back, when they're coming back to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash from Bavel, and Chagai is in charge of testing the Kohanim to see if they're really fit to be Kohanim. Okay, so we actually have like a small recording of the test that he gave them to see if they're really fit if they know their halachos or they have to do more review, etc., etc. And so he tests them. What does he say to them? He gives them a case. He says, "Hein Yisrael at 16b3, and Yisa ish b'sar kodesh bechanaf bigdo." If a person has contaminated flesh in the corner of his garment, what that means is a person has like a sheretz, person has like a rodent on their clothing, v'naga bechanafo, and their clothing, okay, which really means the animal that's there touches. Right, there's a dead. I know it's bizarre, but keep in mind they had a hem on the bottom of their robes, and things could fall into them. Right? Again, keep in mind they're walking through waste. They live in a different world. We live like a nice, happy, clean world. But they're walking around, and a sheretz falls into the hem of their clothing, and then that clothing, i.e. the sheretz, touches lechem, el lechem, vel nazid, and then the bread touches a stew, vel yayin, then touches wine, vel shemen, vel kol machal, then it touches oil or anything edible. Okay? Hayigdash will become contaminated. Right? So we're at the fourth degree of Tumah, and the question is it going to be contaminated? V'yanu kohanim v'yomru, lo, and the kohanim said, no, they will not become contaminated. 17a1. V'amarav ishtabush kahani. Rav, the same Rav that we've been discussing, actually says the kohanim made a mistake. They made a mistake. So what do you see? That really, wine and oil, which is what was just mentioned over here, those are things which really do become tameh. In other words, the fact that Rav said they made a mistake implies that what? That meaning the Kohanim said, no, they don't become tameh, right? And Rav saying, no, they made a mistake. So what does Rav obviously hold? That wine and oil, i.e. beverages, do become tameh. So the Gemara says, Midu tameh el Rav. Rav mashke beis matchayatani. What was the source of this whole thing? It was from the statement of Yosef ben Yoezer, who said the liquids of the butchering place. Right? What are the liquids of the butchering place? They're not all liquids. Blood and water. But when it comes to wine and oil, in other words, we misunderstood Rav until now. We assumed Rav meant all liquids will not be able to come tameh. That's not true. Rav never said that. All he said, the whole basis of the whole halacha was based on Rav Yosef ben Yoezer, who said the liquids of the butchering place. Now, those liquids are only blood and water. When it comes to wine and oil, which is what mentioned over here, he does agree that they do become tameh, and therefore the Gemara said, we've learned something new, that when Rav said that liquids not become tameh, he didn't mean all liquids, he meant blood and water. But yes, other liquids like oil and wine, which are not liquids from the butchering place, those liquids could become tameh, and therefore there is no question on Rav. Okay, by we I mean Yosh, we'll pick up tomorrow on the top of this Amud. Okay, have a great day.